Gentrification. Gotta hate it, gotta love. Nah, gotta hate it. Always hate it. It only makes sense that I start with a book that centers gentrification just as the classic that it was based off of centered classism. Yes, I am talking about Pride by Ibi Zoboi, which is a retelling of Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. Now, I would start by stating honestly that I was not a big fan of this book, but I do recognize that it's because I entered this book with biases, certain biases that other people, or some of whom are my friends who got the chance to read it, they didn't have these biases, and so they gave the book 4 to 5 stars. Personally, Pride and Prejudice is one of my favorite books of all time. It's clearly one of my favorite classics, so I protect that story very religiously. And the thing about retellings for me of a classic is you have to retain as much of the soul of the classic as possible. And Pride did do that to a very large extent. And like I said, it's a tiny pet peeve. Actually, it's several tiny pet peeves, but I'm just extra like that. But like I said, this book works so well for the gentrification prompt because this book is set in New York, in Bushwick to be precise, and we follow Zuri Benitez, also called Zizi for short. She's our spin on Elizabeth Darcy, and she's smart and passionate and talented and excellent poet, you know, has really close bonds with our family, which I really love to see, especially a connection with her sister Renee. And we see this family, the Benitezes, you see them growing and being such a tight-knit community, and we see the community, the rest of the community around them. So it's not just these families, they are also a representation of the greater Bushwick community that they're a part of. Unfortunately, this story does center gentrification, so we deal with the pain and the loss that the Benitezes feel as one by one their friends and their neighbors pack up shop and they can't pay their rent, so they have to leave. And as they're leaving, wealthier families drive in. One of these wealthy families is the Darcy, and Zizi clashes with Darius Darcy. And just watching it happen in a YA setting was actually very entertaining. Like I said, it was a good book. I just had certain pet peeves. I'm not about to go into it because this is not a review of Pride, but if it is that you love classics, if it is that you love retellings, if it is that you love Pride and Prejudice, you might just consider picking it up if you've not read it yet. Also, Ibi Zoboi described New York like so perfectly well. I was present, I was in Bushwick. The food. The Benitezes are Asian Dominicans, so the food, this book made me so hungry. I'm so hungry thinking about it. But yeah, that's the first book on my list. Next up is a book that has been on my shelf for quite a while and I kept putting off because I know it was a trilogy and I was waiting for the third book to come out. Yes, I tend to do that because I like binge reading certain series and I know I'm going to love those series. That is the Shadowshaper series by Daniel Jose Older, which also takes place in New York. This time around, we're following Sierra, who, unlike Zizi, who's a poet, Sierra is a graphic artist, and she discovers certain magics known to only a particular group of people known as Shadowshapers, who can connect with spirits through music and art and stories. And she discovers that she herself is a Shadowshaper, which is a great thing, except for the fact that there is somebody who is hunting Shadowshapers in order to take their powers for himself, and as such is hunting them one at a time. And all of this takes place against the backdrop of the gentrification of Brooklyn. And speaking of the gentrification of Brooklyn, that is a perfect segue to the next book on my list, which is The Invention of Brownstone, Brooklyn: Gentrification and the Search for Authenticity in Post-War New York by Suleiman Osman. Now, most people believe that the New York Renaissance started in the 90s, like the mid to late 90s. That is not the case, and Suleiman Osman takes us on that journey, starting from the 60s and 70s, where young, idealistic, and white graduates pushed for a Brooklyn of historic buildings, industrial lofts, and traditional ethnic neighbors. And they did this because they wanted a Brooklyn that would be a solace, a haven of some sort from the rapidly growing, more technologically driven world that existed outside of this cocoon of Brooklyn that they decided to push for. Now, although the initial struggle and fight was done alongside the poorer residents of Brooklyn who teamed up with them, race and class tensions started to rise as Brownstoners started moving in mass numbers to the poorer areas, thus pushing out the people who were originally there, who considered Brooklyn their own, out of Brooklyn. This is a book I've not read yet, but I am particularly interested in historical accounts that detail and chronicle the gentrification of New York, especially Brooklyn, which is one of the world's most visible examples of gentrification and just how devastating its effect can be, especially on the people who were native to these areas. Now, a lot of gentrification stories approach the stories from the perspective of the families that are living in those areas, in said areas, the gentrified areas. But in Candice Montgomery's By Any Means Necessary, the story is told from the perspective of a business owner who happens to be a college freshman who is juggling, his grades, going to school, falling in love, alongside being the person who inherited his uncle's bee farm. And Arturo, who is our lead protagonist, is trying to juggle all these things when he gets a call about the upcoming foreclosure of the bee farm, and he has to rush back home, and as such he has to go back home and handle that. So he's dealing with banks calling, he's dealing with lawyers constantly at his heels trying to get him, trying to harass him into selling the farm, because for the greater good. And he's also dealing with, getting good grades in school, and also dealing with his thoughts and emotions about Gabriel, who is the first boy he's ever kissed. So I like hearing about young people running their own businesses and seeing this YA character be the one who is running his uncle's bee farm and who is determined and desperate to hold on to that legacy, that bit of a beloved uncle. It makes me very happy. So yes, By Any Means Necessary, by Candice Montgomery. Then there is This Side of Home by Renee Watson. Now, I have lived in gentrified neighborhoods back when I was in Ibadan, and I've also been observing the gradual gentrification of Mafoluku, which is this area in Lagos. Basically a neighborhood that is built entirely on stilts. Nigerians like to call it the Nigeria's version of Venice. And what I've noticed is that in every discourse and conversation about gentrification, there's always two sides. The people that rightfully are pointing out the displacement of the people whose homes and neighborhoods have been taken over, and the people on the other side who are only seeing it with regards to, these areas need development, etc., etc. So there are always two parts to that conversation, and that is a conversation that is carried out in This Side of Home, whereby we observe the gentrification of a Portland neighborhood through the eyes of twin sisters, one of whom is really, really excited about the soon-to-be influx of restaurants and businesses and shops and boutiques that would be flooding the area, and the other one who is appalled and dismayed and heartbroken at the loss of the Black businesses that are being pushed out, their friends who are being driven out of their homes as a result of rising, housing costs, etc. So I think if you've always ever wondered, like, a fictional account of that dichotomy, of the existence of that, then you might consider picking up This Side of Home. And then there's The Education of Margot Sanchez by Lilliam Rivera. Now, this book has been marketed as being Gossip Girl with a Latinx lead. Now, confession time, the show might be trash. The show might be trashy, but I am a huge, huge fan of Gossip Girl. Like, the first couple of seasons. Later, season 4 was kind of meh. Season 5 was clearly very rushed in order to just wrap things up, but I was a big fan of Gossip Girl, and so that pulled me in. That was a hook that pulled me in. In this story, we follow Margot, whose father, when her father, right, finds out that she took his credit card and went shopping to change her wardrobe. I know, it's insane. All I was thinking is that my mother, my very African mother, would kill you. Like, you'll be dead. And you'll be dead and buried without a tombstone, because my mom would not want anybody mourning your ass. Anyway, Margot gets caught and gets grounded by her father, which, if that was my mama, the only grounding I'll be getting will be my dead body being interred into the ground, because I repeat, my ass will be dead. But anyway, her father grounds her, and the punishment is for her to spend her summer working at her father's deli. Now, word is Margot is not the most likable character. Like, not likable, but she does grow through the course of the book. And all of this is set against the backdrop of the gentrification of the neighborhood where her father's deli, the neighborhood that has always been home to her. Yes, it's told against the backdrop of the gentrification of that neighborhood. Now, if horror is your genre, if horror is your cup of tea, then maybe consider picking up Bottom Feeders by Ezra Clayton Daniels and Ben Passmore, which takes place in the rapidly gentrifying bottom yards in Southside Chicago, where our lead protagonist and character, Darla, and her friend move to in a search for cheaper rent. And through their eyes, we observe the monsters, both real and metaphorical, who are slowly taking over the neighborhoods and displacing the people and the culture that makes up the bottom yards. It's been described as being a cross between Get Out and The Thing, which I just think spooky. Well, next up is Halsey Street by Naimi Costa. And see, mother-daughter relationships can be complicated, as seen in Halsey Street, where we follow two women. There's Penelope, who just returned home, who moved back to Brooklyn from Pittsburgh, and is surprised to discover that she does not recognize her home anymore, as gentrification has stripped it of everything that she knew and loved. And then there's Mirella, who is a mother who left the family back when Penelope was much younger and relocated to the Dominican Republic. Now, these two women, beautiful and flawed as they are, will attempt to reconnect in a story of self-discovery, sacrifice, and love. In How to Kill a City, Gentrification, Inequality, and the Fight for the Neighborhood, Peter Moskowitz takes us on a journey from New Orleans to Detroit, from San Francisco to New York, showing us gentrification from the eye of starving families who can't afford to put food on their table or keep the roof over their heads, and the corporations and politicians who create the discriminatory housing policies that further reinforces the race and class divides. It's yet another book that I absolutely do intend to get to soon, because I am very much intrigued. Then there's The Epic Fall of Arturo Zamora by Pablo Cataya. This book calls to my soul. See, Arturo is 13 and he loves basketball and he loves mango smoothies and he loves working at his abuela's restaurant, has a dishwasher. Also, there's a new girl in his neighborhood who is really, really cute, and she loves poetry and she loves going to poetry reading. So as far as Arturo is concerned, his summer is set until a smarmy land developer shows up, and with him threats of gentrification. And it is now up to Arturo to fight back, and he will do so using poetry and protest and the untold stories of his family and Jose Marti's poetry. Like I said, this book It calls to my soul. Next up is Sabrina and Corina. Stories by Fajarfo-Anstine. Now, yes, it is. I bring you another collection of short stories. What can I say? I really love short stories, the way they can tell a complete story in a short period of time, and then you get a glimpse into this character's lives. Like, I connect deeply with short stories, especially when they center indigenous Latina characters seeking to live their lives in a world that infuses sadness in it practically every day. Yes, this book is sad, heartbreakingly sad, all the while speaking on themes of female friendships and relationships. The short story that particularly draws my eye is Tommy, where our protagonist leaves prison and returns home only to come back to a gentrified city that is nothing like the home that she had left behind before she went behind bars. And now she's haunted by the shadows of what once was and never will be again. Like I said, sad. If you want middle grade fiction, however, then I would suggest taking a look at Chez Colleen by Alice and Martin Provincent, which follows the people of Chez Colleen, the community Chez Colleen, living and being happy in their rural low-income neighborhood / community. And honestly, community is what we get with this book because it's so small and so tight-knit. So if you love tight-knit communities where everybody assists and help each other and everybody come through for one another, then yes, Chez Colleen does capture that aspect of community so well. But it also captures the helplessness and powerlessness of said community when the town decides to build a reservoir on their land and they have to dismantle the community ecosystem that was and that has sustained them all this while and go their separate ways. Gentrification, everybody. Now in Isabel Quintero's My Papi Has a Motorcycle, which is illustrated by Zeke Pina, we bear witness to a love letter to a community that our protagonist considers and calls home. On the back of our father's motorcycle, she shows us Corona. I know, the irony. She shows us Corona in California, the sights of it, the sounds of it, the smells of it, the taste of it, everything that comes together to make Corona home. All the while also taking note of the rapid changes that are descending on her neighborhood that is slowly and surely becoming gentrified with each passing trip of the motorcycle, and how people within the communities such as this, how they strive to hold on to those memories before they too vanish, carried away like leaves in the wind. It's a bittersweet feeling, isn't it? The gradual eradication of everything you know and love. Who would have thought that this prompt would have me feeling like this? Anyway, the next book on the list is Afrocentric Comics Volumes 1 to 4 by Juliana Jewel Smith and illustrated by Mike Ampton and Ronald Nelson. When gentrification starts creeping on the neighborhood that surrounds Ronald Reagan's university, our lead protagonist, Naima Pepper, who attends the university, enlists the help of other undergrads of color, and together they launch mydiaspora.com, which is an anti-gentrification social networking website whose aim it is to push back against the encroachers. Like, this comic sounds like it is right up my alley, and it's giving me Dear White People vibes. I don't know if I'm the only one that is seeing it, but it's giving me Dear White People vibes. So I want this comic. I am desperate to have this comic. I intend to read this comic sometime soon. And something tells me that you do too. Next on the list is yet another comic. I know, lots of comics with gentrification. Next is Ali Queen Breaking Glass by Mariko Tamaki, which was illustrated by Stephen Pugh. Is it Pugh? Is it Pugh? Pugh. 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 I have to stop doing my mouth like that because clearly I'm going to go with Pugh. But see, I love comics. I'm certain nobody's surprised, but I love comics. I love Marvel a little bit more than DC, even though Sandman is one of my favorite comics of all time. Same goes with Constantine. So, like, I love comics, and I absolutely love and adore Harley Quinn. And in this comic, she is a teenager. She's a teenager who is observing the rapid gentrification of her neighborhood, and she feels powerless, like there is nothing she can do to stop it. And as such, she is torn between who exactly she should team up with in order to channel that powerlessness. Should she team up with Ivy, who is focused on trying to make their neighborhood a better place to live in, or should she team up with Joker, who wants to take down Gotham by taking down one corporation at a time? So she's torn, and like this comic, just I want to read this so bad because I am very intrigued. I have been loving the recent reimagining of all these characters as teenagers that has been going on for the last couple of months, almost a year. Now, most books on gentrification rightfully focus on the displaced communities, you know, that are affected by gentrification. And like I said, rightfully so. Gentrifiers, however, by John Joe Schlitzman, Jason Patch, and Mark Lamont Hill, on the other hand, focus on, like the title says, the gentrifiers, and how most of us are unwittingly gentrifiers. Now, as someone who is living in a community that I am observing in real time how this community is slowly becoming more and more gentrified, I feel that, I understand that. They also examine the root causes of gentrification. They look at the two sides of the debate and the mistakes that are often made, which is that the communities native to these areas that are getting gentrified are never taken along. They are not asked for any direct input with regards to what is happening to their communities. And the fact that for you to really understand the root of gentrification in America, you have to trace it back to its source, which is redlining and housing segregation engineered by the FHA. Next up, we have The City We Became by N.K. Jemisin. I know. Like, when you have a story that is all about how individual cities have souls, right? And New York City has 5 souls represented by the 5 different boroughs, and there are avatars for each of those boroughs, and there is an ancient evil that has arisen, and these avatars have to come together to defeat that evil in order to save New York City. All of this told against a backdrop of gentrification. Of course, it has to make the list. Like, I am still offended because my copy of this is still on its way. Borders being closed tends to do that. So, it's still on its way. I don't even know if I don't know when it would arrive, but I do intend to read this soon. If it still keeps taking time, I might just buy it on audio and just listen to it on audio. If you've read the book, if you read The City We Became, and if you've read it like either physically or on audio, or if you've like maybe done that simultaneously, like you were reading the book physically as you're listening to it on audio, drop it down in the comments down below which you think is preferred. Do you think I should just hold on until I have a physical copy of the book, or should I just take the plunge, get it on audio? Because, you know, audio is just, help me choose, like, please. Now, a lot of the books on this list look at gentrification from the lens, like, of America, right? But gentrification is a global thing. It's not just limited to America. Hence the reason why the next book makes the list, which is Gentrification in a Global Context: The New Urban Colonialism. And this is a collection of different short narrations and accounts of gentrification taking place across the world, written by different writers who individually seek to capture the face gentrification wears in their own countries. And even though gentrification might look different or might be called a different name across different countries in the world, one thing stays the same: its effect, which is the displacement of the people native to these areas, all for the sake of an improvement in the neighborhood, which we all know is bullshit. Then There Goes the Hood, Views of Gentrification from the Ground Up by Lance Freeman, which analyzes the gentrification of two Black New York City neighborhoods from the perspective of former residents and present residents of those areas. It tries to balance the dichotomy of how gentrification can offer a better life and simultaneously threaten long-established communities whose residents are naturally and as expected and justifiably upset and angered that it took gentrification of their neighborhoods for their neighborhoods to get the fix-up that it deserved. Like I said, justifiably angry. And lastly, the last book on the list is The Municipalist. Municipal. So The Municipalists. English. Yeah. The Municipalist by Seth Fried, which takes place in a distant future, in the United States, whereby our lead protagonist is a civil servant working for the United States Municipal Survey Office and is paired up with a robotic AI to handle a terrorist plot from a group intent on stopping the gentrification of their community, which is technically the day job of the lead protagonist, Henry. Yes, the particular office that he works for in the civil service handles the gentrification of these areas. I am intrigued to see exactly how that story plays out, if we would end up rooting for or hating our characters. If it is that they go ahead and still gentrify those areas, I have a feeling that I know exactly where I would stand with regards to this lead character. So yeah, there is that. But that is all. That is 20 books. Recommendations for the fuck gentrification prompt. For those that maybe, if this is my first video on my channel that you're watching, I host a readathon. I created it last year called the Fuckathon, and I host it every year in July, from July 1st to July 31st. There's a list of prompts. I usually do these recommendation videos to help people either to, if it is that they already have those books, they can pick up those books, or for them to have an idea of the type of books, the variety of books that are available for each of the prompts. Now, I am going to leave in the description bar below the announcement video to the Fuckathon and all the other videos I have done so far. So please go check it out. Yeah, go check it out, because I think I have 3 more prompts left to go. Yeah, and my plan is to be done with all the prompts by Sunday, so that Wednesday I can drop I'm going to be premiering, my TBR for July. So my Fuckathon, you guys can see what books I chose. So yeah, there is that. Anyway, I need to be done with the recommendations by Sunday. That is my plan. I promised I was going to give you all an extra 3-5 days for you to finalize your prompt and have all the videos up by then. So I will deliver on that. But that is this video. If you liked it, please do not forget to give it a big thumbs up. Check out my other videos. Subscribe if you want to, and if you do decide to subscribe, please click on that notification bell so you can know the minute I have a new video go up. I make new videos every Wednesdays and Sundays, and I will see you soon. Until then, stay passionate, love books, love yourself. Bye.